Thank you very much, Ellen, and I appreciate you chairing my session. It's lovely to see you again, and thank you for the time to present here today. Thank you to the organisers. We've heard about a few different ways in which the energy landscape is going to change through electrification of industrial processes, the production of hydrogen, new cleaner fuels, industrial process heat, and also CCS. Now, solar thermal technology is one way among many of reaching a number of those sorts of milestones down the track. And I'd like to start off with talking about electrification and just to leave in your mind the fact that CSP technology, concentrating solar power technology, is alive and well today. Now, this is an overhead photo of a plant in production in Morocco, in Ouarzazate. It was built by Senair using their technology. It comprises a 150 megawatt trough technology, a 200 megawatt trough technology, and also a 150 megawatt tower technology. It's working well and has been in operation now for over a year. In China, there's been a very strong resurgence in commercial CSP projects. Over 20 were announced, 4 have been built over the last 18 months and now commissioned, and there's another 13 still under construction. I mentioned this particular technology here, the one of the ones in China, because it's so unique. Whereas most tower technology aims up to a receiver on top of the tower, here there are actually 2 bounces of sunlight, firstly from the heliostats on the ground up to a secondary reflector mounted on top of the tower, whereby the sunlight is again reflected back down to a receiver at ground level. And I mention this because there's 3 main ways in which you can transfer the energy of the photons from the top of the tower back down to ground. You can do it with a fluid, such as particles or liquids or gas. You can do it by electricity, by producing the electricity at the top of the tower and then transmitting the electricity down, although that makes storage a bit difficult. And you can also do it by bouncing the photons back down, as you see here. This is this field you can see in the foreground is 17 megawatts thermal, and they plan to build 15 of these to produce electricity. But it's a technology that is going to be very useful, potentially for industrial processes, particularly where you have high temperature processes and you want to run those at ground level. And the largest announced project at the moment in CSP is a 950 megawatt total CSP plus PV project in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. And that comprises 700 megawatts of CSP with both tower and trough technology and 200 megawatts of photovoltaics. And all together, they have a production price there of 7.3 US cents per kilowatt hour. A couple of weeks ago, that was about $1 per kilo, 10 cents per kilowatt hour Australian, but it's probably about 12 or 13 at the moment. This slide shows that there's global projects happening all around the world at the moment. And if you look at the red line there, from about 2008 up until today, there's been a strong resurgence of growth in commercial CSP projects. And that red curve represents around about a 38% year-on-year growth rate of commercial CSP projects. So even though it's only making up about 6 gigawatts in the world at the moment, which is a couple of orders of magnitude less than PV and wind, it's certainly a technology which is out there working commercially. Here are a number of the projects operating commercially in the US. And you can see again there that since 2013, new projects have been introduced, and each of those individual colours represents one particular project. And you can see that, for example, the purple, the green, or the light blue, or even the orange there, they're staying around about the same each year, representing the fact that each of those projects has gotten up to speed fairly quickly and then is operating commercially year on year at their design output. The only project that hasn't is the dark blue right at the very top, which is the Crescent Dunes project, which is presently being repaired and should be operating again either later this year or early next year. The darker, sort of middle blue right at the very bottom there are the original CEGS plants, which were built from 1985 to 1990. They're starting to drop off now in commercial output because they're over 30 years old, but it does show that there's a lot of longevity potential for these CSP projects. I'll just jump through that slide and want to show this slide of production in Spain. And they have 2.3 gigawatts installed there over a 6-year period. The majority of those projects have storage now, and they've been able to operate on a 24-hour basis, albeit throttling down the turbine to reduce load overnight. But you can see a period there of 17 days where there was 100 megawatts being operated continuously. The turbines didn't shut down for 17 days. And what about Australia? Well, we don't have any commercial projects operating at the moment, although Vast Solar is looking at a project in Queensland to be announced shortly, we hope. But the Australian National Outlook in 2019 did some modelling of this is electricity energy generated, modelled out to the year 2060. They've looked at 2 scenarios, one called the slow decline, where Australia fails to adequately address its various challenges, or alternatively the outlook vision, where Australia reaches its full potential. And the dark blue at the top of the screen there represents solar thermal. And you can see that particularly under the outlook vision, they've predicted a very strong increase in solar thermal potential for Australia. And that's probably driven largely by the storage potential and therefore the firm dispatchability that CSP offers. And that's got to be a very strong thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about industrial processes. Just a quick 101 for CSP electricity in particular. We have collectors which are collecting the thermal energy as it lands on them. We have trough technology there in the green, where the efficiency reduces fairly quickly with temperature, and in fact can't really operate beyond about 400 degrees Celsius today with oil, or beyond about 550 degrees Celsius with molten salts if they decide to go that way. Central receivers there in the red, and also the dish technology where, again, as the temperature increases, the collection efficiency decreases. But we know that turbine efficiency increases with operating temperature. So what happens if we put the 2 of those together? And what we find is for electricity production that there's a sweet spot, particularly for central receivers and the point focus technologies, around about the 700 to 750 degrees Celsius. And that's the range that most researchers are trying to develop these days. The thing is that the fluids that are being used in the conventional plants today are not going to be suitable for that 700 degrees. The first important aspect is collection efficiency, and being able to get the size of the image on the receiver down as small as possible so that you can reduce the receiver size and therefore reduce the thermal losses from the receiver. And you can see for this particular example that you can move that image around in a few different locations, but eventually it's going to be too big for the receiver. If we can have smaller heliostats, we've got many more image targeting possibilities for that particular heliostat. And it means that the receiver efficiency can be very much higher. That's going to be important as we go to higher and higher temperatures. Now, in terms of fluids that can be used at these higher temperatures. I mentioned that today we can only go up to about 560 degrees Celsius, and that's using the solar salt. But two different liquid pathways have been under development, the chloride salt pathway in the US and the liquid sodium pathway being developed by ASTRI here in Australia. And you can see that the real point of difference there is the thermal conductivity, and that sodium, being a fantastic heat transfer fluid, offers you nearly 2 orders of magnitude greater thermal conductivity than the salts. And therefore the sodium has a very real potential for greatly reducing the size of that receiver and therefore increasing its efficiency. A possible roadmap for CSP cycles is to go from the parabolic trough technology of today, operating at about 390 degrees Celsius using subcritical steam turbines with hot and cold tank storage. The molten salt tower technology operating at 560 degrees Celsius today, still with subcritical steam turbines, but much greater efficiency and much better use of thermal storage. To hopefully within the next 5 to 10 years, those same molten salt towers being able to be used with a supercritical CO2 turbine at greater efficiencies. And then down the track, sodium being used as a heat transfer fluid with supercritical CO2 turbines operating at 700 degrees or more with much greater photon to electron efficiency. The other way of, or one other way of transferring the heat from the tower down to the ground is using particles. Particles are fantastic because they're very inexpensive, they don't melt, they can go to very high temperatures and they don't freeze. Here's an example of a cold flow test we conducted at CSIRO showing a falling curtain of particles. The idea being that the solar radiation heats up those particles to well over 700 degrees. It can probably go to 1,000 degrees or more. And that makes it a very suitable candidate, not only for electricity production, but also for industrial processes. I mentioned industrial processes at the start. And at the moment, ASTRI is looking at 7 different processes for the direct use of solar heat, concentrated solar heat. The solar reforming of biogas, the solar hydrogen production for industrial processes run by the University of Adelaide, a unique technology using dual bed gasification with, again, concentrated solar energy, looking at solar thermal applications in iron and steel production. And we've heard that that's a very real production process for Australia and a very, very significant contributor to CO2 in the world. Solar thermal beam down process for looking at applications in mining in Australia using technology from an Italian company, Magaldi. Solar thermal redox reactions operating at very high temperatures. And Greg Methers already talked today about solar thermal photocatalysis. I want to just talk quickly about 2 of these technologies, the solar reforming of biogas with particle technology. And here we've said that I'll mention natural gas reforming a little bit later, but solar reforming of biogas means that we can have a fuel such as methanol, diesel or aviation fuel with greater than 100% CO2 reduction. In fact, it's going to be drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere effectively if you use a biogas feedstock. I mentioned quickly before the co-production of hydrogen and oxygen process being developed by the University of Adelaide. This is an interesting process where you can see in the bottom right-hand corner there concentrated solar heat at quite high temperatures being used for sulfuric acid cracking that leads to the production of oxygen for melting copper by burning sulfur. We can then recover that sulfur dioxide from the combustion of the sulfur. We can use that then in a depolarized electrolysis process for the production of hydrogen in various processes, but in a mining application, in particular for mined vehicles, and then the production of sulfuric acid for leaching in the copper process.
Wes, 5 minutes.
Before the solar gas reforming of natural gas, it's a project that CSIRO has been looking at for over a decade now. It's probably stalled due to the fact that there hasn't been much of a call for hydrogen, but now with a new call for hydrogen in the community, both within Australia and globally, I think that there's a very much renewed interest in this so-called blue hydrogen, where we use high temperatures around about 800, 850 degrees Celsius to reform natural gas using the concentrated solar energy. Using that process, we can get 25 to 30% solar energy into the molecules of the hydrogen. We've run this process on our solar tower here at Newcastle in the past, and this graph shows that we've had very stable hydrogen production, with the hydrogen representing around about 70% of the syngas produced. Excuse me. So just to finish up the critical components that I see for the CSP path in Australia, first of all, having operational commercial plants using available technology for electricity production. The pilot scale demonstration of emerging technologies is very important, and right at the very start of today, Gus mentioned the valley of death that so often occurs in these technologies, and pilot scale demonstration is one way of getting beyond that. I see the importance of very strong international collaboration towards common goals, and there's a very really importance in early stage R&D. We shouldn't lose sight of the TRL 2, 3 and 4 developments. And all of that leads to the development of CSP for industrial process heat and fuel applications. If we're successful in those things, we'll have bankable finance projects, we'll have a healthy rollout of a suite of different technologies and applications, and we'll have that healthy ecology existing between research, development and demonstration, and also commercial technology. So thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions now if necessary.